Welcome to the Leadership for Society series, People and Planet in the Information Era. I'm Brian Lowry, and today I'm discussing AI, machine learning, and society's future with Timnit Gebru, founder and executive director of the Distributed AI Research Institute. Thanks for joining us, Timnit.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm just going to start off by asking a little bit about your work at Google. So you worked there, I think, from 2018 to 2020, co-leading the ethical AI research team. Can you tell us a little bit about the work of that team?
Yeah, you know what's funny? I realized that in 5 days. Oh no, actually, I forgot February's a short month, but March 2nd, I would have been um, outside of Google as long as I've been in it.
Uh-huh.
So that's a big milestone for me because it reminds me of like how short my time at Google was, even though it felt very long. So yeah, when I was there, I co-led a team called the Ethical AI team. And it was started by my co-lead, Meg Mitchell. And she actually, as far as I know, coined the term ethical AI. And so our team was, and we grew it. It more than doubled in size when I was there, but it was still a very small research team. And our goal was to have an interdisciplinary team at Google. So not just engineers and not just computer scientists, but also, people in linguistics, people in social sciences, etc. Charting the path for the future of AI in a manner that is not harming people, in a manner that is not getting data without consent, etc. So that was our goal. We were a research team that was putting out more works on research, but we also provided a lot of information and advice to other teams. So many teams would have questions about their process or what they're doing, and so they'd come to us for advice as well.
I see. So, two things. One, you mentioned it felt like a long time. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
because you're working so hard or things that are going on there, but I'm wondering if you felt like it lived up to its mission. Do you feel like the
No.
team?
Well, our team. Okay, so our team definitely lived up to to the mission because it was me and Meg running the team,
Hmm.
and so it was a very diverse team. Like I don't even think I think we accounted for all the diversity in the research and machine learning, machine intelligence group is what it was called.
Hmm.
But we had to fight for every single thing that we wanted to do. For instance, we hired Dr. Alex Hanna, who is now a director of research at DARE at our new institute.
Hmm.
She's a sociologist. She got her PhD in sociology, and she was the first sociologist we hired as a research scientist at Google. So we had to figure out a process to get that done. Or, just anything we were doing, we had to fight for everything. So that's what made it feel so long, right?
Hmm.
It wasn't just, so even if our mission for our team, was trying to live up to the mission of our team, we were in a larger corporation, which definitely does not live up to its mission. And they even got rid of don't be evil, right? So
Hmm.
perhaps, I don't know, maybe their mission was changed explicitly. But when you're a multinational corporation like that, and you're basically telling them from the inside, right, that they need to make less money. That's kind of at the end of it.
Hmm.
That's kind of what you're advocating for. You're saying, hey, you want to launch this product, don't launch it because it's going to be harmful. Hey, you want to do this thing tomorrow, you might want to increase your product cycle length, the length of your product cycle,
Hmm.
right? Don't launch it tomorrow, maybe launch it next year or 5 years from now. And also do all of these tests before you do it, which means you have to hire more people and do all of this documentation, which means you have to put more resources. So at the end of the day, what we were doing from the inside is telling them to voluntarily make less money when nobody else is telling them to do that. And that's just I've found that that's impossible to do with other
Hmm.
kind of forces, forcing you to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy you brought up this impossible to do. I wonder what we think about that or what you think about that. Private companies are driven by profit motive, right? That's what they exist to do, to increase shareholder value, or at least that's how a lot of people think about it. So what can we expect in terms of ethical development of AI in that context?
I'm actually curious to hear your point of view on this, being at the GSB, but I think that there has to be an external force that levels the playing field for all of the companies and makes them follow the same exact timeline, follow the same rules, so that they're not in a race to produce something, a race. Like, for instance, there is the Chat GPT, right?
Mhm.
OpenAI came out with ChatGPT. Everybody's talking about it. I'm so tired of it. And like, and I don't want to talk about it more anymore. But Microsoft pumped, $10 billion into OpenAI, and they said they're now integrating it with search. And it's such a crazy idea, as far as I'm concerned, to have a chatbot based search engine. And it's quite dangerous too. But they're doing it. So now, and then Google's was felt like pressure to come out with that, and they had issued this code red, and invited the founders to come back, and now they have to create this chatbot because it seems like shareholders might be excited about it. So now there is no external force forcing both of them to stop, and or either not do this, or think about the consequences of doing this, and put in resources into understanding that, right? Because the only thing that there is really a race, right? So there's
Mhm.
nothing else that's forcing them to do that. And so I think that there has to be some sort of external regulation, external force that encourages everybody to that kind of levels the playing field. Because otherwise, even if you're like a well-meaning company, and you're slowing down, and you see some other company like racing, you're going to start racing too.
So what would the regulation look like? So what I think you're saying is you need outside regulation, so it's probably government, but often governments aren't in a position to know what's going on in tech, to keep abreast of the latest developments. How would it work?
So, I don't think that governments need to know the ins and outs of how things work, right? Like, they don't know how cars work necessarily, but there is regulation for smog, how much smog that the car can put out, or, how the safety, how safe it has to be. And, all these cars have to get recalled when they find out that things are unsafe. And unfortunately, it took decades, many, many, many decades, for
Mhm.
that kind of regulation to come in place. And in the process, the entire makeup of society was changed, right? I don't want that for tech. I mean, we're already late, but I don't want it to take like 100 years and many issues and death and a whole remaking of society before we have any kind of regulation. But so I think that we can have some basic kinds of regulation. So, for instance, first of all, in the EU, right, they have the General Data Protection Regulation. But the problem is in the US, we don't have anything like that, really. I mean, Illinois has the Illinois biometric law, but there's no federal law at all that requires anybody to do anything. And even when you have something like the GDPR in the European Union, there's an issue of enforcement, right? You have these agencies that don't really have teeth and are understaffed, and many times the onus is on a user, or a person who's using a particular system, to know, for instance, whether their data is being used or not, and then request that their data not be used, and then check that it has been. How do I have that kind of time and
Mhm.
resources to be
Mhm.
taking on this fight? So I would love to have any kind of regulation that forces the corporations to prove to me that they haven't used my data without my consent, right? I shouldn't be the one who is fighting, who's kind of asking for this information. They should proactively have to do that. That's just one example, because right now, like, I know, I've heard people talk this way, executives talk this way, where when you're trying to look into, so going back to your earlier question about uh, what is it, like, living up to our team living up to our mission. sometimes when I was trying to look into something, they would just like lights would go off. All the lawyers would be descending on me, asking me, why do you want to look into this? Why do you care about skin tone? Why? And I'm just like, that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Because what the executives would say is that if you find a problem and you don't know how to fix it yet, that's bad because you can be held legally liable. But if you don't find that problem, you're not held legally liable. Like you have plausible deniability. How is that? I don't think that that's okay, right? Like nobody else can say that. Oh yeah, like we didn't look into it, so we didn't know that your food was poisonous or something like that. But or we found out that it was poisonous, but we don't know how to fix it, and so that's when we were going to be held liable. I just feel like the tech industry is operating like no other industry, right? They have they're sort of completely unregulated, where many other industries can't act that way.
Yeah, so you made a analogy to food, right? So you were saying that, like, let's say for food safety, if somebody poisoned a number of their customers, they'd be a problem, right? The government would have an issue with that. I wonder what the danger is that you see for. I know you don't want to talk about Chat GPT, but you brought it up in
I
search.
can break
So,
it up. It's fine. We can talk about it.
so what would be the equivalent harm, right? So I understand if
Yeah.
if I'm the FDA, right, I'm trying to keep
Yeah.
the food chain like safe, right? So if I'm worrying about tech, what is it that I'm worried about? What are the harms?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think many times it's harder to see those as clearly, right? So people, for instance, ask me about face recognition. They're like, what's the problem with, people can recognize faces, right? I can recognize a face. I can remember faces. Like, why is it a problem to have face recognition? Whereas like, if it's a bomb or something, it's super clear, or guns, it's super clear. So I think it's harder to make that connection with some of these technologies what we're talking about. But for instance, with Chat GPT, I mean, so Emily Bender and Chirag Cha have this paper called Situating Search, and it's talking about the dangers of exactly this, the dangers of having a chatbot as a search engine. So right now, we have let's say Google search, which still has a lot of issues. Sophia Noble wrote a whole book about it called Algorithms of Oppression. But what happens is you search for something, and you get a bunch of different you get pointers to different things people have written about the thing that you're searching, right? You don't have one definitive answer. If I say, are Black people evil, I'm not, I'm getting a bunch of, or are Black people criminals? If I ask this question, I'm not getting, oh, yes, absolutely they are, or no, they're not, ideally. But like, how many kinds of questions can you do that for, right? What I'm getting for search is I have a bunch of different pages. And so what I do is I can look at who wrote that, right? And put it into context. So it's not just an answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for contextual knowledge as well, right? Whereas in a chatbot, what you're doing is, first of all, you're misleading people into thinking that there's some sort of definitive answer, right? And you're not even telling them where you get these answers from, right? If I say, is it beneficial to eat crushed glass? The answer is absolutely not. Of course, in that case, like but you have these chatbots. For instance, there's one that that Meta put out called Galactica that would write entire scientific sounding papers with about the benefits of eating crushed glass, for instance. You can generate those kinds of text. So in a search engine, now you're taking even one more layer of context that people can have while giving them these answers, and the answers themselves can be extremely dangerous. This bot is just trained on what's on the internet. and
Hmm.
and and you know and like what's on the internet is, we know what's on the internet. And so like there's all sorts of things. We even saw my friend Ruman Chaudhry, who used to be a director at Twitter, was talking about how there was a defamatory statements about her in this the new Bing whatever GPT powered chatbot. So first of all, it just we know that there can be some wrong, completely wrong, dangerous answers to these questions, and
Hmm.
people don't even get to see the context, right, before they act on those kind of wrong and dangerous answers. And secondly, there's like all sorts of things that are made up about people that are defamatory, and that's in English. That is in English and in an American, in the US context, which is the context that these companies know the most about. I'm not even talking about like other languages and countries that these people don't know anything about, right? So I really don't understand how this direction is the direction that they're going into. And I do hope that they will be held liable, though, and so that will maybe stop them if they're found liable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, like, so liable for defamatory. I get that defamatory content, but you're raising a lot of concerns that aren't really defamatory, like in the sense that people might disagree with a conclusion, but there's no objective right answer. And given that you also pointed out that this is built on the data that already exists out there, right? It's learning from the internet. What would you have companies do? Because again, this is like the putting aside regulation for a second. There's a race. I mean, it's hard to imagine for me, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that people are going to back away from this kind of AI technology that's already out there, right? As you pointed out, Chat GPT is everywhere. People are talking about it, companies are chasing it. Where do we go from
So,
there?
I think that I first of all, always, I never believe in any sort of technological inevitability, as if it's out there going to be developing on its own anyway.
Mm.
So, I never believe that, right? I think there's Chris Gilliard, who is a Just Tech fellow. There is a fellowship called a Just Tech Fellowship. Made a great point, which is that when we found out that asbestos was harmful, we banned it. We didn't say, well, it's everywhere anyway, and let's see how we can. We just, when we find out that something is harmful, if we make that case effectively, we can ban it. So for me, the first thing is you should not have a chatbot based search engine. That just
Mm.
should not be like, you should have this is, first of all, the issue with the kind of race that we have right now. It comes from a really ridiculous ideas. I mean, I just wrote a paper about this. So what they're trying to build, if you look at OpenAI's mission statement, it says that they want to build artificial general intelligence that is beneficial to all of humanity. It's not just AI, right? It's not just artificial intelligence. It's what they call artificial general intelligence. And this idea, this goal of building artificial general intelligence comes from, like, you can root it in transhumanism, and and transhumanism comes from the eugenics movement. So the person who coined transhumanism was the chair of the British Eugenics Society, right? And so there are all sorts of eugenics roots to, I mean, which I'm not going to elaborate on now. I wrote a whole paper about it now, to that are, that tell you why these people want to build what's called artificial general intelligence. That's the root of the goal. So because as an engineer, I'm a scientist and I'm an engineer. As an engineer, when you want to build something, you first of all have to scope it out appropriately, right? You say, these are the tasks I'm building this thing for. These are the inputs, these are the potential outputs, this is the tolerance, and then you can do some tests to see if it's safe, if it's not safe, etc.
Mm.
When you set out to build something that's called artificial general intelligence, and when they talk about even ChatGPT or Galactica, or like similar things that people have, Galactica, they were like, oh, we put out a model one model that can do anything. It can write code, it can do protein folding, whatever thing. It can write scientific papers about any topic. You've already lost. You've already lost the safety game if you're telling me you're starting to build a product that can do anything for anyone under any circumstances. You can't even test out whether it works or not, right? So for me, when you're saying what should companies do, they should first of all not set out to not claim that they're building one model that can do everything you can imagine under all circumstances. That's already an unsafe endeavor. What they should do is build constrained, scoped out applications for specific tasks. So for example, speech to text transcription, that is a specific task. It takes speech as input and tries to transcribe exactly the speech that, that's a specific task for me. Automated machine translation from language A to language B is a specific task. From all languages to all languages, that's what they're also claiming now. Like, oh, you can have one model that can do all of the, from all languages to all other languages kind of thing. And we've done work that shows that like some of these claims are so ridiculous. But what they do, so that's what I advocate for, task specific products. But what happens is you have these large corporations that claim that they have one model for everything, which is not true. And so this hype kills all of these other smaller organizations that are actually building these task specific things that I'm talking about. So for instance, Meta again came up with a paper called No Language Left Behind, and they acted like they've solved machine translation. They're like, oh, 200 languages, one model that can like just translate from all languages to another. And OpenAI has this thing called Whisper. They make similar claims, and there's a company called Lesson, and it's the co-founder is a fellow at Dare, who builds a machine translation software for like 3 or Ethiopian and Eritrean languages. And there is another organization called Ghana NLP that focuses on a few Ghanaian languages, right? And Lesan, Asman was the co-founder of Lesan, told me that potential investors came to him and like, oh yeah, like I think you should close up shop because Facebook has already solved this, machine translation thing. We don't see a spot for you, so we're not going to invest in you. So on the one hand, you have these smaller organizations who would have actually know the context and are actually building, tasks, scoped out task specific things, who would actually, who are losing resources to these larger organizations based in a single location, right? Saying that they will serve the entire world with one model, which we know they're not going to. And then on the other hand, also, you can't build one model for everything because it's not even a well-defined or scoped out task in the first place that you can actually, scope out and test appropriately and design safety protocols around.
I see. So you're actually opposed to these general models. So
Absolutely.
These general models.
Absolutely.
So kind of general intelligence. And do you think we can pull that back? I just wonder how that will happen, right? Because as you pointed out, there's so much energy behind those kind of general models now that your friends, the Dare fellows, are being told like, oh yeah, that's been solved. We're not going to give you money for this more defined, this more tightly defined task because this general model already exists. So I guess broadly, I wonder how you think about slowing this down. You think government will step in and slow it down? Like what can be done at this
point? I think it's good to look at history. If you look at the history of AI, there's been AI winters, and many times right before the AI winters, there are these kinds of grandiose claims. Like if you read some of the claims from 1956, they sound exactly the same as what they're saying right now. So it's like you would think they're saying it's like right now. I want to do this game actually of showing people like A and B and like guess which one is from now, guess which one is from back then. It's exactly the same cycle. So you have this huge media hype cycle and they talk about things like they've solved everything, and then people see that it's not true, and then there's what they call AI winters, and people then go work on these task specific things. So actually what happened is that a lot of many people, when I was started working in AI, like in, let's say in the AI lab,
Uh,
more than 10 years ago, right? I never called myself an AI researcher. None of us did. We forgot, we didn't even know we were, oh, I guess we're working in AI. What you would say is, I'm a computer vision researcher. Somebody would say, I'm a natural language processing researcher. I'm a robot. That whole AI thing came in this kind of, this wave of the hype. That started around 2013 and started building, and so it was also, it was like that in the let's say early 90s too, where a lot of people didn't want to associate themselves with the term AI because it became associated with like these grandiose claims that researchers didn't deliver on, and so they're like, I'm gonna go, so because of that, because I know that history, I don't think that there's no going back from this general intelligence thing, because I know how there was a concerted effort by a small group of people to move the field towards AGI. Most people in the field did not even think about it or want to build it at all. It's like a small group of people, very adherents of like these cults like the transhumanism and effective altruism, long terms, and all this stuff. They're the ones who like literally started the movement to build AGI around, in the 2000s. So and then they were like all these billionaires were pumping money into it. So it's not like this natural progression of technology where you're like, there's one objective truth like physics or something that you're trying to get to. That's not how this field is. So I have absolutely no doubt that we can move away from that when people see the pitfalls, and I just don't know when it's going to happen and what the casualties are going to be on the way. So in terms of what governments can do, I think before we even get to new regulation, there is existing regulation and existing, I would say, frameworks that we can look at. So one example here is worker exploitation. So why do people talk about these things like they're magic? Because there's a concerted effort to make you think, like hide all of the things that go into it, right? So for people who don't know about that, that might look like magic. You think people start talking about whether these things are sentient or not, because they don't know that there's millions of workers like filtering out the outputs, tweaking the models and doing all sorts of things before it gets to the general public, right? So there was just this article by Time magazine about these Kenyan workers who are paid like $1.30 or something per hour to filter out all of these horrific outputs from ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion, DALI, that text to image generators. And these people had PTSD and all of that, and and it's similar to content moderation and social media. Now, if these people had to, first of all, could not just scrape your data without your consent, so there's like artist lawsuits, right, against Stable Diffusion. If they had to appropriately compensate all of the people involved in this process, I bet you they'd decide that this is not worth it, because they wouldn't be able to make money, right? They wouldn't be able to make money if they weren't literally stealing data. So I think that even before you get to, new regulation, enforcing existing ones and paying attention to the type of exploitation and theft that is going on, supporting the artists that are actually, fighting back. I think that is one way in which this could be curbed. I also wonder, there's like existing regulation like Section 230, right? So social media platforms can argue that like they're just publishing what other people write, like they don't have editorial control or something like that. I don't know the details, but now imagine you have a chatbot search engine. Are you gonna if you argue that you're publishing other people's work, you're now admitting that it's derivative work, like the art that the artists are arguing. So then you have to obtain their consent and copyright and all of that. But if you want to say that it is not derivative work, then now you're admitting that you are actually publishing this work. So all of the stuff that you're saying, you can be held liable for. So I think this is why, OpenAI can be super experimental, because it's hyped up and everybody's like talking about it, whatever. But Google has to be super, super careful, because search is their bread and butter, right? So they can't just go, and because then they'll like really be held liable and things like that. So I'm not buying the hype. Like I'm not, I do think that something is going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
I see. I mean, well, the Chat GPT thing is interesting because people's experience of it is it seems like a break from what they've experienced before, right? That's what's creating the hype. And so when people see that, I think it's hard for them not to get excited about what can happen, and then companies not to get excited about the profits that can be generated by that. And it sounds like you're anti that kind of generalized hype for sure, but about the hype around this kind of these general models. But I'm curious about the work you do to try to de-bias, and I assume that is focused on the more well-constrained models, because you don't seem to really take those general models seriously. But when you focus on the kind of tight, well-defined tasks and trying to make sure that bias doesn't creep in, the question becomes, who gets to decide how that process works? And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So Christopher Rufo, who's someone who got the critical race theory thing people got all bothered by that. He was the journalist who kind of drove that. He's now warning that concerns about, say, DEI and AI is woke, and it's going to be problematic. Yeah. And so I just wonder how you think about managing that, right? How do you think about managing who gets to decide how these things are de-biased, if they're de-biased, or if they're biased at all? Like, how do you deal with just a general sense in society that these kind of concerns about bias, for example, are covers to either take their freedom or get power for certain groups? How do you manage that?
So, first of all, I wrote this paper with a historian called Lessons from the Archives, and we were saying what people in machine learning can learn from archivists about data collection, because archivists have been collecting data for a long time, and they've been debating some of these issues. So first one is, what we say is, in machine learning, people pretend that things are neutral. They say, oh, we'll just gather stuff from the internet, and because the internet represents everybody, it's neutral. We don't have any opinions, right? There's no such thing. There's just no such thing in general. So we have to start from the assumption that there's no such thing as neutrality. And so what it means then is you have to make your values explicit, and you have to curate your data accordingly. And so, so with archivists, there's an actual curator, and there's an agent, and there's, how the curator thinks, what their politics are. So there's like no illusion of objectivity, right? Like there's no illusion that this curator is curating things according to what they think. And so what we wrote, speaking of Google, the reason I got fired is because I wrote about the dangers of large language models, along with my collaborator, Emily Bender, and my then co-lead, Meg Mitchell, who also got fired. But what we wrote there, we wrote a lot of things, but one of our central recommendations was, you have to understand what's in your data. You can't just ingest everything and spit it out. You have to understand what's in your data, and you have to thoroughly document it. So before we even get to your question of who gets to decide, people have to know what's in the data, first of all, right? Like if I want to object to it, I want to know like what kinds of things that they're using to train these models. Then right now, OpenAI is deciding, right? And they want you to think that, oh no, Sam Altman tweeted saying, oh, it should have no political bias at all. It should just, and people are like, so fascism is okay? Like what, you can't do that. You can't have that, right? So this idea that there's no such thing as a neutral data set or a neutral model or whatever. It is encoding some values, and the difference is whether those values are made explicit or implicit. So right now, the values that are encoded are the ones that people at OpenAI think are, that these are the values that we should encode, right? And so so that's basically how I feel. And so who gets to decide? That's society. A lot of times the problem with these models is even when society has moved on, right? Even when society has, we give examples about Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too movement, right? Even when society has had these debates and is making progress, you can actually take society back because your models are not going to be updated as fast, and also like your data is more static. And even when society is changing, so for example, we saw all of these ways in which people were kind of they have filters, right? But like circumventing the filters by asking ChatGPT to write a code telling you, which gender, write me a code on, who's going to be a good programmer or not. And then like the code will literally say, if the gender is a woman, don't hire them. If otherwise you can hire them, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so the critical race theory is horrible. People who don't even know about critical race theory might be like, oh my God, this is woke because, you don't want to, like, if you try to guard against those things, right? Those kinds of biases, they might be like, oh, you're being woke because, you're saying it's not okay to not hire women, for whatever. But you have to take a stand. You have to say that's, I don't believe that this is right. And that comes down to, I think, again, our governance structure of society and what we're doing. But the problem is these people are not being governed by that. Our information is not being governed by that. So I think Emily Bender makes the point usually that they talk about democratizing AI, quote unquote, but democracy implies shared governance as well. And right now, there's no shared governance of these models. They're just doing whatever they want. And then they're claiming that they'll be able to replace lawyers, replace doctors. They say these models are going to give medical advice, etc.
I mean, given what you just mentioned, the possibilities that people will maybe accept from AI. By that, I mean like using it as for legal advice or for legal functions or for medical advice. What's the model for how we integrate this into society? I mean, right now, the model is clearly a capitalist model where people go out and create entities, organizations that build things that people will pay for or that they can monetize in some way. I mean, and I accept your idea that things can be, let's say we can regulate away asbestosis. But what's harder in our system, I think, is to regulate away something that people are willing to pay for. And these things sound like things that people would pay for.
Well,
so,
I don't think so. I don't. So you know what these people wrote? Like, this is exactly what the case is. In Weapons of Math Destruction, Cathy O'Neil said, rich people, more privileged people, always get processed by humans, mostly. And poor people, the masses, are always get put through automated systems. So when again, Sam Altman was talking about his utopian society just a couple of weeks ago. He said, ChatGPT is gonna make us healthier because if you can't afford care, you can use it for medical advice, right? That's what they're selling. They're saying, and then the people who said, oh, we can replace lawyers with ChatGPT, they're saying, oh, poor people are now going to be able to have legal advice because they won't be able to afford lawyers. So this is what's being put. What people want is, they don't want a doctor that is a chatbot. that they want a doctor, you know.
Mm.
And so, but if you drive them, if you say that, or if you convince people though that your chatbot is going to be better than a doctor, then and if you make it such that doctors no longer have a job or something, then you can drive the market such that people are forced to accept this kind of thing, which is why I think the hype is really something that needs to be countered. Like, for example, if for OpenAI, the best possible scenario is that there's no more teachers in school. It's just a chatbot that teaches students,
Mm.
because everybody just pays OpenAI. You don't pay that teacher, that what everybody. There is no more doctors. You just pay OpenAI. There's a chatbot doctor. You just interact with a chatbot all the time. I don't think that's a world people want. I think that they're interacting with this thing and it's cool, but I don't think they want a chatbot doctor. I think they want an actual doctor who they can talk to and ask questions and interact with.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know that people want social media as it exists now, but they got it. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, but people want social. So here's here's a good thing about social media. So people didn't want social media as it exists now, but they got it. But hey, but it is like, but they might not want something that completely breaks democracy down. We can have like influence. There was just this article about Team George, two people based out of Israel that are getting, they were having disinformation service as a hire to disrupt elections, coups, 33 whatever countries, right? Including the US. People don't, if they don't know these things, and if they don't have any power, right? This is why the hype needs to be countered. It's there and they can't do anything about it. But there might be parts of it that they can use. There might be a different way to have social media that doesn't give us this horrible other part of it. That's what I think for large language model based systems. There's ways to use them. Like I was saying, for speech to text transcriptions, for automatic speech recognition, for machine translation, etc. That's not like what OpenAI is doing. That's not the model that OpenAI is doing.
But I guess what I'm like, what I meant by the people didn't want, I don't think most people want the social media that we have now, is that sometimes you end up in places not because you chose the destination, but because of all the little choices you made up until the destination. So I'll give you an example. Sure, I don't think the average person or any person wants a chat AI as a physician. They'd rather have a person. That's true. Let's assume that's true. At the same time, many people can't afford to have good physicians. And if you give them an option that is better than what they could afford right now, let's say that's a chat AI physician, they're likely to take it, not because it's their preference, but because it's what's available. And in part, what these people are saying, people who want to make money are saying like, oh, people who can't afford it now, they'll go to this thing, is a recognition of that society is unequal, that people who can pay for physicians will get physicians, but the people that can't afford a physician might end up with a chat AI physician. And what they want, what the people who are making that want to claim is, isn't that better? Haven't I made the world better? And I guess, how do we avoid ending? I know, I get the truth. That is no, 100%. I guess what I'm saying is, but it's hard to tell people who don't have anything not to use that chat AI physician.
But those people are not the ones making the decision, right? I think what we want to do is we can't tell those people not to use the AI, but they're not asking for it. They're being put in a position where, like, so one of our fellows at Dare, she used to be a delivery driver at Amazon, and she was telling us, we wrote articles together about how people were fired on the spot with algorithms tallying whether or not they should be fired or not without speaking to a human, right? And she was also a charter school teacher, and she was using, these quote unquote personalized education things that they were experimenting on those kids. They were experimenting on her kids because the kids didn't have a choice. So what they would do is, these are kids who can't say no, like you mentioned. These are parents in very, very poor places who don't have who don't have a say, basically, right? Who don't have power. They can't advocate on behalf of the kids. They have like multiple jobs, etc. So they had no choice, yes. And the companies were experimenting on these people all the time. And so she was against it and she was trying to fight back. But the problem is she didn't have any resources and she didn't know where to go. So it's not like she wanted to be using it as a teacher. Her other colleagues didn't want to use it. The parents didn't want to use it. They were just put in a position where they had to. And I think what everybody else needs to do is advocate for a more equal society and resources for them to make decisions that they want to make, rather than like being like, okay, well, if that's going to happen anyway, so we should all go along with it. We shouldn't, right? Why should we go along with it? So that's what I think, and it's not like they're making decisions. A lot of people have to, for instance, that's hiring is another thing, right? A lot of people are being subject to these hiring tools, where some of them actually stopped some of their bad practices when we started speaking up about it, which is like, you'd be recorded on camera and they would like advertise, they would do emotion recognition on your face, and you're not even talking to a human, right? On camera emotion recognition, stuff that we don't even know, like that doesn't work really. And then they say they can give nonverbal cues about you, about your performance, to the potential employer. I'm sure those were breaking laws anyways. A lot of people didn't even know that this stuff was happening to them. It's just that, but they're not gonna go protest while they're trying to get a job, right? Because the employer has power over them. So yes, I agree that people might have to be put in this position. They're not yet, and I would like to fight against that kind of dystopian future where, like, hey, yeah, like, you get a doctor, I get a chatbot, like, you get a teacher, I get a chatbot. Like, I'm just gonna be in the screen, I'm not even gonna talk to a human all day, kind of thing. I don't think that's not the kind of AI we want.
So that at least takes me to the last question I have for you, which is you have a lot of concerns about the direction things are going, which all sound reasonable. So I'm curious. Well, one, you have concerns and you're in this space. You are working in, I guess, I don't know if you want to call yourself working in AI, but other people would see you as in that way. As you look into the future, like, what do you imagine? What are you afraid of? And I think you've kind of captured that, but I'm more curious about, what does a positive future look like with the tools that we currently have? Like, lay out for me what the best case scenario from your perspective.
So yeah, that's a really nice question, because I'm trying to put myself in that space. It's like, it's much harder to think about your vision for the future when you're like fighting a bunch of fires that you're afraid, like, no, don't, no, And so we're trying to like do that at Dare. So first, we are putting out these like possible futures series. So it's like to encourage everybody to think about a technological future that they want, and like remind them that some of the technological futures we had are literally because of who was in power and who made those decisions and who had money. It wasn't like this inevitable march to where we are right now. So these are like some short speculative pieces where we first kind of talk about what we want, and then we think about like how we could, make this happen. So one of them was called like an internet for our elders. Like, what would an internet that my grandma would have wanted to use look like, right? She didn't speak English, she didn't read or write, and she was paralyzed for a while. So like, what would an internet that would bring her joy look like? Well, one would be that it wouldn't have to be shut down. Like, governments should not have the ability to shut it down when people are protesting and stuff. Another one is that it should be multimodal, which means that she shouldn't have to only type, or when she's interfacing with it, right? And it should be everybody who speaks whatever language should like find joy in communicating with whoever they want on the internet. It shouldn't be catered to like people in hegemonic and dominant views, you know. So that's what I mean. Like that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about, right? And in terms of AI, well, how can you help support that? Well, you can develop language technology in many different languages with people who understand that context. So for me, I think about a decentralized view of how we developed these technologies. Like I'm trying to work on like a federation of smaller language tech startups that kind of like work together rather than having one company saying one model for everything, for instance. The other way that I think so that's one way. So I'm thinking, you know, how can you get to this kind of future where I think we really need a decentralized sort of view? Because even these companies who say, you know, they have one model for everything or whatever, first of all, that doesn't work. And secondly, even if it did work, I don't want that. I don't. That's a dystopian future for me, like where the proceeds of anything, like the revenue or whatever, just goes to this one company somewhere. But thirdly, they will never prioritize communities that they don't think are useful for them or will give them money or dominant, right? And so what I want is a pluralistic community to flourish in the world. So I love, like, for instance, how there is this group in New Zealand. I think they're called Teiku Media. And they were working on language revitalization efforts for the Maori language, which was kind of the number of speakers were decreasing because, you know, they're colonized people and they were beating it out of them. They weren't allowed to speak the language, etc. And they used, they were building language tech for language revitalization efforts and guarding their data. And when like this company wanted to license their data, they said no, and they like wrote a whole reason why they said no. They were saying this is the last frontier of colonization. Basically, data is the last frontier of colonization, right? And so for me, that is the kind of future I want. And then they built a platform where other smaller indigenous communities can also build their own language tech and kind of figure out, you know, guard their data, like control their data as they please. So I would love if there was so many different organizations like that, and then they had a federation and they had like more power to fight back against like some of these other practices. I would love that, right? And the other ways in which you can use some of these tools, the tools that we can build, is for people in marginalized groups to basically to gather data about their situation so that they can fight back, right? It's like, so I mentioned Adrienne, who used to work at Amazon, and right now she's working on a project to quantify the amount of wage theft that is happening, you know, at Amazon, right? And so we have to build tools for that. And it's kind of like, I guess Simone Brown has a term for it, and dark matters. It's kind of like watching the watchers, like surveilling the surveillors kind of thing, you know. And you can use a lot of AI based systems to do that. Like another project we have is in South Africa, on like working on spatial apartheid, like quantifying the impacts of spatial apartheid. So like you know, apartheid supposedly ended, but people in townships still have it's basically like they know that their quality of life is worse, but they don't have any tangible like way to prove it, you know. And so and it's a similar thing in the US with redlining. So I think you can use data-based system, like data journalism, for instance, right? So you can use AI systems to do that and sort of hand more power to people in marginalized groups than those who have currently power. So those are the kinds of things I want to see. I want to see projects that put power in the hands of people who currently don't have it.
Great. I really appreciate that. And if people want to hear more about the stuff that you were just talking about, how do you find DARE? Can you just give us a...
They can go to our website, dareinstitute.org. We're in the process of revamping our website, so they probably won't see as much of our stuff right now. But we're also on Mastodon and Twitter and LinkedIn. And so so they'll find our handles at DARE, and they can sign up for our monthly newsletter. And I actually have to say that for people who want to hear more about the chat GPT, large language model kind of thing. On March 17, we have a virtual event where it's like a half-day virtual event where we're going to reflect on our paper Stochastic Parrots that came out about like basically almost 2 years ago, where we were warning about some of the issues we're seeing right now. So we'll have a mix of like researchers in AI, but also like writers and people involved in the AI Act, for instance, in the EU, and artists who are fighting and talking about like the impact of some of these models on them, and people, exploited workers, data laborers, some of these people that I mentioned who are working in Kenya, filtering out some of OpenAI's models, etc.
Great. And just to be clear, DARE is DAIR,
Yeah.
right? So Distributed AI
Distributed
Research.
AI Research Institute. Yeah.
Right. Great. Oh, thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time. It was really fun and interesting to hear your point of view.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So our next and final conversation in the series will be March 13th at 6:30 Pacific time, and we'll explore how technology continues to affect us. And our guest will be Professor Kate Eichhorn, Chair and Professor of Culture and Media at the New School. Thanks.